Hello, my name is Zachary Horn, and welcome to my presentation, Looking Back, Facing Forward, a study in the recontextualisation of Australian folk songs for contemporary jazz ensemble. This study and creative work was completed as part of my music honours at the University of Newcastle this year, 2021. My research question is this: can Australian Federation period folk songs be successfully recontextualised into a contemporary jazz context? If so, what are the affordances and limitations in this idiom? And to find that out, I have arranged and recorded 4 Australian folk songs from 1885 to 1905 for a guitar-centred tentet with horns. Before we get into my findings, we'll do a quick rundown of the most important work that led up to this research. Both Shand and Johnson suggest the very real and yet fleeting nature of the Australian accent in jazz. Musicians Sawkins and Evans have demonstrated the importance of individual musicians through the generations on the establishment of this accent. Most contemporarily is Robson's evolving work on the global communities in jazz, looking at the Austral jazz scene in Sydney since 1973. The importance of these works is in confirming that the Australian jazz sound is substantial enough for this study to have real significance. The attitudes of key voices in the field is equally significant. We have the self-proclaimed inventor of jazz, Jelly Roll Morton, a leading voice in jazz today, Wayne Shorter, and significant figure within the Austral community, Kiwi, Mike Knock. We'll give you a moment to read their quotes. These 3 musicians indicate that jazz is defined primarily by the process rather than the composition, and that parent styles can only add to this process. There are many works both here and abroad that have taken advantage of that attitude. From America to Benin, Puerto Rico to Denmark, there have been many successful jazz artists that have fused their own folk music with the jazz idiom. From these works I chose a few for musicological analysis and compared them to my own work, finding similar choices and opportunities for reinvention. Of the pieces analysed, these 4 impacted my work the most, 2 from Australia and 2 from abroad. Bailey imposes her distinct big band style on the classic Banjo Patterson piece, Waltzing Matilda, with syncopated invention on the melody using chromatic passing and bebop line cliches, as well as an extensive use of articulations to shape the piece. For Hank Williams' I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry, guitarist John Scofield superimposes a variety of tonal centers over the simple triad-based melody, relying heavily on whole tone and augmented ideas, as well as the signature rough edge in his sound. Australian Andrew Robson's adaptation of the British folk song Died for Love exemplifies how denser harmonic treatment, tempi and feel changes, as well as individualism in interpretation of melody can drastically change a piece. Lastly, Niels Henning Ostad Pedersen's interpretation of the Danish traditional Natten Ursa stil most prominently demonstrated to me how personal expression and use of atypical instrumentation with upper register double bass as the main melodic instrument can give individualistic flair to a simple folk song. Now, there is limited but authentic research in this domain already existing, most important of which looks at that Denmark and Puerto Rico folk merger with jazz, as well as Robson's merging of British folk songs as practiced in Australia. Finally, from the folk side is the work of Meredith and Anderson, who were so important in preserving and canonising many of these bush ballads, which then has allowed me to arrange them for this project. Now, let's get into the pieces and my analysis. I started the arranging process with the melodies as presented by Meredith and Anderson. No harmony, lyrics detached, purposefully as simple as possible. Then I moved to the middle stage, which is a lead sheet arrangement. Added harmony, slight changes to melody, introduction and ending. Then finally the full fleshed out arrangement. Here is a sample of the recording done at the Dungeon in Adamstown, Newcastle, earlier this year. For my musicological analysis, I split my findings into 4 areas that you see there. Musical language pertaining to the melody, harmony, and rhythmic concepts. Timbre being the effect of the specific instrumentation used. Form relating to structure, style, and feel. And finally, expression dealing with individual style and impact on this process. First is musical language, which is the largest section of the analysis. Through my arranging process, I found these pieces were very receptive to a variety of harmonic, melodic, and rhythmic treatments. I put this down to the simple nature of the melodies containing mostly steps and small leaps made of triadic and diatonic scalar motion. They presented a wide range of possibilities for invention, whether it be mild adjustments to the melodies to fit the arranged styles, reduction, fragmentation, all the way to extended invention in creating new melodic material based on the theme. You can see primary invention in the arranged melody for Flash Jack in the left image, as well as extended invention in the sax soli from Flash Jack in the bottom right. Key centers were an important consideration as many of the original compositions are notated in open or sharp keys, which really is due to the instruments these pieces were traditionally played on. However, for ease of reading and accessibility for horns, I have shifted the pieces from sharp keys to flat keys, which then presented its own issues with range and arranging notions. The last major point in melodic adaptation is the potential for antecedent and consequent writing, as seen in the top right example. The phrase lengths and melodic shaping of the selected pieces afforded great opportunity for typical big band style interjections and counterlines. As for the harmonic potential of these pieces, I found they responded well to a selection of techniques and approaches. I was able to use a variety of different harmonic colours and voicing options, both typical to big band, with the example of the sax soli from Flash Jack in the top right, and also atypical, with open parallel 6 and guitar-centric cluster chords from the introduction of the Dying Stockman as seen on the left. As for chords, I used 2 different approaches, which I found worked well for these pieces. Firstly, with Click Go the Shears and Dying Stockman, I extended and elaborated on the already existing chords as played by folk players today, adding sevenths, passing chords, line cliche bass lines, and similar ideas. The other approach was taking an already existing chord form and applying it in an almost contrafact style, a 16-bar blues form for Botany Bay and Sonny Rollins' St. Thomas for Flash Jack. Again, the simplicity of the melodies also afforded a large scope for melodic and rhythmic invention such as fragmentation and reduction, as seen in the example from the drum backgrounds in Flash Jack, as well as extended motivic development in the rhythmic analysis of the sax soli from the same tune. Also, through small shaping changes, these pieces demonstrated a strong reception towards bebop and Latin jazz phrasing language, which is so important when applying them to this contemporary big band context. We come to timbre. Through the 4 arrangements, I was able to explore and utilise the timbral potential of this tentet, whether it be the pointed brilliance of the brass, the warm lyricism of the flugelhorn, the whole range of saxes from the nasal soprano to the boisterous baritone, as well as the unusual inclusion of nylon guitar, an exposed upper register of double bass, much similar to Niels Henning's use of it. Here's an example that highlights the musical language and timbral points that we've discussed thus far. each of the arrangements, I followed a similar basic roadmap. I made sure to include each of these different types of sections to fully explore the affordances and limitations of these pieces in the contemporary big band context by using very typical big band form guides with an introduction, first presentation of the melody, perhaps an interlude, then melody with a development, maybe changing the instruments that play it, inclusion of backgrounds, moving to solos and solos with backgrounds, a final return of an interlude with a final presentation of the melody, and outro. Much like with timbre, I was able to explore a variety of song forms within the jazz and Afro-Cuban styles to which each folk song was surprisingly very receptive to. Botany Bay was a significant example of this, with it starting as a gentle, slow waltz, moving to a faster, bluesy waltz, and finally ending in the Latin realm as a cascara, moving to 4 or a 2/4 feel, and then finally ending in a bembe bell pattern in 6/8, almost a return to its 3/4 origins, and you can see that in my small snippets of the styles and the forms and the bass and drum patterns from those songs. Finally, for my analysis is expression. Jazz practice today is very reliant on individual expression, and this project is no different. As stated with the influential artists at the beginning of the presentation, this is about taking one's own tastes and experiences, using them to forge a unique perspective on a shared medium, being in this case these selected folk songs. These gentlemen are all featured throughout my creative work. Each of them had varying levels of familiarity with the pieces and Australian folk songs as a whole, and it is their individual style and experiences they bring to this project which really justifies the diverse potential of these compositions. Here's an example of how their individual approaches can be heard throughout my arrangements. Lastly, we come to my final section, which is the synthesis of findings. Throughout arranging, discussion, rehearsal, and recording, I was able to distill my findings into a modest but encapsulating list so they could potentially be used for feature research or creative works. These points are not all-encompassing, but rather the notions that I found most significant from my findings. In calculating these findings, I used a reflexive process. Thanks to the delay of recording and lockdowns throughout the year, I had a large amount of time to communicate with people with different perspectives to help reach the conclusions that I came to. These people included my supervisors, accompanying musicians, musicians not involved with the project, and uniquely, classmates, lecturers, academics, and friends taking the same class but not involved in the music sphere. And here we are. These are the findings that I was able to distill into these affordances, which I'll give you a chance to have a look at now. Many of the ones that were surprising to me related to the inclusion and also lack of inclusion of lyrics. Softening process we discussed, a decolonialization of them perhaps, or even as we reach the limitations, issues with familiarity, difficulties of a layperson or non-musician to connect or recognize the pieces. All worthy considerations. Through these findings, I believe there is authentic opportunity for inclusion of these pieces within the Australian jazz canon. From here, I'm pursuing a variety of avenues for output of this work, which you can see there. I'm also looking to pursue further research in this area, namely in finding out how Australianic folk songs can be used as a medium in defining the modern Austral jazz sound. Thank you very much.